WNST, Tessa Baltimore and Baltimore positive. We're positively into what we call the off season around here. I call it crab cake season. We're going to be doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour next week in Catonsville with our State Fair friends, as well as Beaumont and El Guapo. We're still trying to figure that all out. It'll be next Friday in Catonsville. All of it brought to you by the Maryland Lottery. I'll have some holiday cash drops to give away, as well as our friends at Window Nation. I got my Window Nation. Yeah, I got my bucket hat. I don't need to wait for Orioles season to get a bucket hat. Window Nation hooks me up. 866-90-NATION, the way to find them. And you buy two, you get two free, and there's 0% financing, which is even a better deal than they gave me back in the summer when I got my windows. But I love my windows because it's cold as hell. The Ravens are eliminated. But thank God for the theater of billionaire born on third, thinking they hit a triple, sons of Peter G. Angelos, to create media stench earlier in the week. I mean, with all the Lamar and the Ravens and Lamar and Tyler Huntley and Lamar and the Jets and Lamar, and there's barely the oxygen that John Angelos chased down one of my fellow brethren, a journalist, and I've invited Dan Connolly on. If he comes on, great. I'd love to talk to him. But I'm talking to other journalists who may know Dan Connolly, and it was serendipity that Thom Loverro, Tommy Love, as I affectionately call him, I think I found him at Shelley's back room with a cigar and a curveball. But I reached to Tommy because he put a tribute up to Muhammad Ali this week as well, Martin Luther King Day this week, and lots of things happening. Thom Loverro is the esteemed longtime columnist. Dude, I don't even know when you got here. I mean, you've been here as long as I've been here. When did you make your way to the Washington Times, Thom Loverro?
Well, you know what, Nestor? I don't think I'm wrong about this. I think we left the Baltimore Sun with the same buyout.
January, I left on Martin Luther King Day, 1992.
Yes, that's when I left too.
I took my buyout check. I went to Calvert Street. I took my buyout check, Tom, and I got in my Jeep and I drove to Minneapolis for the Thurman Thomas Super Bowl that the Washington football team participated in. And that was when I left. So I left 31 years ago.
Well, that's when I left the Baltimore Sun. And I had a job waiting for me at the Washington Times covering sports. I covered news at the Sun for years. I was a news editor and reporter, but I got a job covering sports for the Times. So I took my check, I paid off our minivan, and we went to Disney World.
We went the other way. I was cold as hell where I was, man. It snowed. It was terrible. It's my first Super Bowl.
I've been doing this as long as probably you've been doing this.
All right. Well, you were in all those press conferences all those years, man. I mean, you covered the All-Star game in 93, the Peter's going to buy the team a month later in 93. We're going back 30 years, man. And if there's ever a time for me to pull the Peter principles out, and I had forgotten how many references there were to the good-looking boys, back in the 90s when they were helping him sign Sid Fernandez and Chris Sabo and benching Leo Gomez. I think you and I were in those press conferences with Johnny Oates back in the day, right? When Johnny had that forlorn look of Peter called today. I'm a manager dealing with the owner of the baseball team telling me who to play at third base tonight, and trying to tell us how bad it was and how quickly it got bad, right, with Peter?
Yes.
Where are you when you see this, the offspring and the fighting with the brother and the mother and him acting like the owner now and mistreating Dan Connolly, but mistreating anyone? Nobody cared when I got mistreated back in 06, Tom, as I remember it. You know what I mean? I'm still waiting for anybody to have defended what I did, which was tell the truth, which was they were lying. It was just such a horrible place to be. And now we're at this other point where not only have you covered a baseball team that's won a world championship down in D.C., but the entanglement of Masson and the decisions made 15 years ago coming back to really haunt everybody in all of this. And now we get this videotape of John Angelos being just a completely entitled moron, a clown. I mean, a clown show owning the team, really.
There's a lot to unpack there. What's interesting is John Angelos, part of the reason Dan Connolly asked the question, even though it was a press conference to unveil some kind of internship program on Martin Luther King's birthday for minorities, is because John Angelos makes so few public appearances before the media. I think this was like the first time in 4 or 5 years he had actually done a press conference that wasn't a Zoom press conference, that was live. So this was their opportunity to ask this question.
By the way, as a journalist, I wasn't invited. You know what I'm saying?
But,
so, like, but what I'm saying is they kept out people that they thought would ask tough questions. Because I am the last one to ask him a question, Thom. By the way, the Rockets Red Glare speech he gave, as long as Fort McHenry will wait, I'm the one that asked him that question. And I had to hijack a tourism event that he did with Christine Brennan and Dick Cass, who has since taken my press credential, by the way, who was involved in that, very much involved. His hands are all sticky and wet from that. But I called Christine that morning, who I know you have a lot of respect for as a colleague of ours, and she was on the dais with the president of the Ravens, the owner's son, or whatever he was being called at that time, of the Orioles, and I looked it up. It was 19. It was the fall of 19 that this happened, so we're going on 3.5, 4 years ago. But they asked for Christine, and I called her. I said that morning, I talked to Christine. I said, I'm coming to this press conference, and I'm going to ask him if he has any intentions of moving the team. And, and she's like, you're a journalist. You should do that. You should be allowed to ask a question of somebody about to get $600 million from the incoming governor.
Yeah, this was the opportunity to ask that. The only opportunity they would have. And there's so much here. First of all, John Angelos doesn't own one piece of that baseball team. His mother and his father own the team. John Angelos has been designated as the controlling person for MLB to do business with, but he doesn't own a penny of that team. So, I mean, let's face it. I mean, the other thing about what he said was, this guy's such an idiot. He talked himself into this boast that if you want to come to the building next week, I'll open up the books and show you our finances. I mean, that was the part.
Now, would I come and pick you up to do that together, or would you pick me up? And at 3 a.m., if he did it on a Wednesday morning, I would make it my business to show up.
Every reporter in Baltimore should be in that building this week, asking to see those books. Now, that's not going to happen. And I tell you what, a few Washington Nationals lawyers should be up there looking at those books as well. They would love to get a look. But that was so absurd. That was so typical.
It was a lie. It was just, I called it what it was earlier. It's bullshit. It's a lie.
Yeah.
It's
not
a lie.
Going to let anyone look at the books. And the irony about this is, I mean, I don't know the Angelos family of late, but I knew them in the early years of the Orioles. And I know Peter enough to know that if he was upright and healthy, he wouldn't let John Angelos anywhere near his books. He wouldn't let his son have a thing to do with those books, So there was just. Here's the thing: I don't understand why this continues to be a story, in the sense that, and maybe you're part of it too. I don't know. They're not moving. They're not going anywhere. Okay, that's not happening. They're going to get sold. Peter Angelos, it's in his will that when he passes on, the team's going to get sold. But they're not moving out of Baltimore. Okay, the MLB has not let an owner move a team since the Senators left Washington in '71. When the Expos moved to Washington, MLB owned that team. They have not let an owner move in over 50 years. Okay, so and of all the owners, they're certainly not going to let John Angelos move the franchise. So they're not going anywhere. Okay, but they are going to get sold. I know that you've got this lawsuit going on between Georgia, the mother, and Lou versus John for who actually controls the team. But once Peter passes on, that team's going to get sold. And I've been told that MLB is going to have a big say in who gets to buy it. And it's just not going to be whoever the Angelos family wants to sell it to. MLB is going to have a big, because of this entanglement of the Masson deal. I mean, the Nationals the Lerners put up their team for sale at the end of last season. And still, I mean, the sale has bogged down, and they're probably not going to sell it because it's all tangled up. the future of both teams are connected together. I don't think you can sell the Nationals until you sell the Orioles, until that Orioles sale goes through, because the Orioles are Masson. Masson are the Orioles. It's the same thing. And the Masson entanglement, if you were to buy the Nationals right now from the Lerners, in addition to the purchase of the team, you're going to have to write a Lerners a check for the 200 plus million they think they're owed from Masson to cover that. Then Masson is still going to own your TV rights. And if you want to get out of that, and if Ted Leonsis is with his NBC Sports Washington deal, he wants to put the baseball team on that network. If he wants to get out of that deal with Masson, he's going to have to write a big check to the Angelos family and Masson to get out of that deal. So, I mean, no one's going to do that. So this is not going to get resolved in DC or Baltimore, unfortunately, until Peter Angelos moves on to the pearly gates and that team is put up for sale.
Thom Loverro is my guest. I did a lot of talking in the beginning, but I definitely want to let you do a lot of it because, I mean, you listen, there are not a lot of people on, and I'm being not just reverent of you and respectful of you. There are very few people who know more about this than I know because, I mean, I've made a life of knowing this every day of my life. I wrote the Peter Principles. I'm going to be re-releasing that. And the history of all of this from the minute he took over and the wildness of all that you covered in the Washington Post and the pressure that was put on, Congress and antitrust and all that happened in 4 and 5 and 6. And then Peter putting pressure back, as Joe Foss once said to me, Peter had no intention of being fair to them. Peter wanted to stick it up their rectum into eternity. And if Peter could sit up and smile while he's eating pudding, he loves every bit of the part that he has entangled and messed up all of this and gathered incredible wealth through all of this that now his son is using as a weapon on a stage. And Thom, my question to you on the entanglement and listen, everybody that's smart says to me the team can't be moved. I take it at face value that there's not a lot of sense in leaving Oriole Park vacant, but I also see the inherent problems that Maryland has, Baltimore has. I see the rosier grass in Nashville. I see what his intentions might be, and I saw the Dave Stewart story the other day and Garth Brooks and anybody else that might be into Nashville. But to your point, they don't know what they're doing with Tampa. They don't know what they're doing with Oakland. Oakland's been a problem since Charlie Finley, right? I mean, forever, and they can't solve these problems. But that being said, they haven't solved this problem. And this is a 2-decade-old problem of unintended consequences back in 05, 06, 07 when Peter dragged them into the mud, dragged them. It feels like yesterday to me, all of this. And it's been 15, 17, 18 years now. But the unintended consequences of letting Peter have his way. First off, he's outlived anything anybody ever would have believed at that point, that we would be sitting here in early 2023, you and I, alive and still young and beautiful, and
Nestor,
discussing this.
Nestor, I think in part everyone agreed to the Masson deal, in part because they figured by the time this came around, Peter wouldn't be on this earth. I think that's what they did. I think they figured they'd be dealing with a totally different Orioles owner and that a much more reasonable person. The story of how Masson wound up like 90-10 Orioles to Nationals in terms of its original investment was the initial deal was closer to 50-50. And the story goes that Peter went up to New York to the MLB headquarters at Park Avenue, walked into Bob Dupay's office, who was Bud's right-hand man at the time. Bob Dupay, an ex-Marine, and Peter basically threatened and intimidated him into agreeing to this new share of 90-10. Now, the Nationals get a little more piece every year up until it gets to 33%. But that was not the original deal. The original deal was much more equitable, and Peter basically threatened them, and they buckled.
Well, all the money was on the front end. I mean, all of the money that by the way, I had to go down to the UB library one day to chase Andy McPhail. And there's early video of that back in YouTube that's kind of not what Dan Connolly did, which was a 10-day press conference. But I'm talking about ambush short of media
Yes.
to ask questions about where all the Masson money was in 2008 and 9, because it certainly wasn't going into Oriole payroll at that point.
And there was a lot of money. There was a back. Look, there's not a lot of money now because we know the regional sports network business is a dying business right now. But back then, in the early days of Masson,
$200 million a year.
when they were flush with subscribers, absolutely, there was a ton of money.
Well, and the other part of that money is it never came under the purview of anybody other than Angelos and Sons. And the
Yes.
Nationals were always trying to get at that money and figure out that money and figure if we were a free agent today in this market, we'd be getting 75 million a year, not 29 million a year. And the poison pill that I always thought had to be illegal was saying you get what we get and we're the negotiator. We decide how little we're going to give to ourselves, how much we're going to
Yes.
penalize our own baseball team, starve, tourniquet our own baseball team, so we tourniquet you so we keep double the money. I mean, it was an ingenious scam
Yes.
by
Yes.
Angelos, but to untangle it later in a for sale where the Nationals are trying to sell the team, and this, can you imagine the Orioles situation getting any worse than it ever was? Like, you really are a historian to this in the same way I am. It's like a Shakespearean thing where this thing's gone, right?
Yeah, but the ironic thing is the product on the team has finally turned around. The product on the field with their group of young players. I mean, they had a pretty exciting year last year, and they should be an exciting team again this year. They've got some real good young talent. Here's the thing that people need to know, though: they're not investing. They're not taking the next step that people expect. Well, now we go out and sign a couple of complimentary free agents to fill in with those young players. That's not happening. They're not going to do that. They're going to live and die with the rookie and the first time contracts of all their players. And like I said, hopefully at some point, not hopefully, at some point when Peter does pass on, this will all eventually get resolved. Now, here's the frustrating thing for people in Washington within the Nationals organization. They believe that the commissioner of baseball could step in and invoke the best interests of baseball powers that he has to straighten out this Masson deal, and he's refused to do so.
Yeah, what is his deal, right? Like, I remember him being the smarmy lawyer back in the 90s. I literally was at the high. It was the last time I will ever be in a room with Peter Angelos while he was lucid. Peter was running behind a curtain away from me and Peter Schmuck because we were there. It was literally the day Bud Selig not Bud Selig, Rob Manfred got elected at that Baltimore Hyatt is where they took the vote. It was 2 doors down from my house. I guess it was in 16. You know, my wife was bald and sick. Maybe it was 15 or 16, whatever it was. And I remember running into Rob Manfred in the coffee shop, and he was all nervous. And you know what? But what's his deal on leadership on all of this? Because much like Goodell, he attends the press conferences and says all the right things, but boy, have they really been destitute in setting the city, my city, on fire in the baseball sense for what this once was and what they always allowed this to be. Whether it was Bob Dupay getting rolled back in 6 and 7, whether it was them throwing media members like me, like they've just always steamrolled everyone. And Major League Baseball's always been afraid of Peter. He's eating pudding, right? Why are they afraid of him now? Why aren't they just coming in here and executing a plan?
Well, you know, I think like Rob Manfred is a lawyer, and I think like everybody who does dirty business, they're afraid of discovery and deposition. They're afraid of being sued and having, you know, the Angelos law firm force MLB, ironically, to open up their books, you know, for review as part of a discovery of a lawsuit. I mean, that's always been Peter's power. You know, it's not necessarily winning the lawsuit. It's getting the lawsuit to the point where you can depose and discover the evidence and the documents that you need. So I think they're still afraid of that. Plus, he's a lawyer, you know, and that he's going to think like a lawyer. And the ironic thing is the Angelos family, they'd rather pay lawyers than pay the learners. So they're going to keep until they're out of the picture. This thing is going to go on and on in the courts. It's not going to be resolved unless the commissioner would step in. And I got to think it's because his fear of being in a lawsuit keeps him from doing that, because this is damaging two franchises right now. The Washington Nationals need to be sold. The learners have turned the franchise now after they won the World Series. And let's face it, there's a lot of sad stories about COVID, much sadder than what the learners went through. But the learners won the World Series in 2019 and never got a chance to capitalize on any of it. They never got the bump in advertising, sponsorship. They never got the attendance because baseball shut down a couple of months after they won the World Series. There was nobody in the stands in 2020. So that really hurt them. Plus, they're in the commercial real estate business. And during COVID, there weren't too many businesses that suffered more than commercial real estate. You look at all the empty office buildings that are in these cities with people working at home. So it happened at the worst time for the learners, and now they've retreated. The payroll for this organization right now going into next year is $80 million. I'm sure it's less than the Orioles payroll, and they're not spending a dime on at least trying to pretend they're going to compete.
Well, I'm selling the restaurant.
Huh?
Yeah, I'm selling the restaurant. I'm making improvements. I'm selling the place.
Yes.
Right? Literally. I mean, Thom Loverro is our guest, Washington Times, legendary columnist, former Baltimore Sun reporter, teaching me things that I didn't even know about the 1980s and his byline and our colleague ship many, many years ago. But through all of this, you've had it the worst, dude. I mean, you've chronicled this criminal down in D.C. with the football team. You've had the Angelos Chronicles up here prior to that, and then its entanglement with Lerner. Maybe you'd have something to say about Abe Pollin or Ted Leonsis at this point, but the Washington football situation as it relates to politics, government, the league, getting him out, who the next owner would be. The astonishing thing for me, and this is for Bisciotti as well, who's since thrown me out, as you know, the team was worth $3 billion in September. It's worth $5 now. I'm talking about the Ravens. And the reason for that is because the Commanders were worth $5 in September and are now worth $7. The escalation of the values of these franchises right now really being driven by Dan Snyder's mess to some degree in Washington right now, right?
Well, that's one of the reasons why the other owners are leaning on Dan to sell the team, is because they know that the sale of Washington, if it's handled right, is a very valuable franchise. It has a history of being a very valuable franchise for the NFL before Dan Snyder took it over. They were last in attendance this last year, and attendance went up for them compared to the year before, and they were still last in attendance. The TV ratings locally have dropped significantly. And when I talk about attendance, that's 50 to 60% visiting fans on any given Sunday in that stadium, which I call Ghost Town Field, not FedEx Field. But in the right hands, this is a franchise in the nation's capital where the NFL spends millions of dollars on lobbying that is very valuable to these owners in many different ways. So yeah, I mean, as everything, if the Nationals sell for maybe close to $7 billion, then that raises the value of everyone else's franchise. It looks like this team is going to get sold. This is for a generation of football fans down here. If this team gets sold, that's their Super Bowl.
Can you imagine me as my last name's Aparicio in Baltimore? Can you imagine? I can't imagine a land after Peter Angelos. Like I can't get my arms around like a normal owner. And I don't even know what normal is at this point. I've been going to these owners meetings for 20 years now, Thom, and I sit around with these people. It just feels like to be a billionaire, you have to be a little creepy, and then want to own a team and want that spotlight and be a part of that. it makes you a certain kind of personality that, quite frankly, leans more toward Dan Snyder than it does Mr. Rogers.
Yes, it certainly seems to. Rich people have their whims and they can afford to indulge them, as someone once said. But I mean, the whole I have not treated the Washington football team as a serious football organization since 2013.
Gibbs?
That was the Shanahan era.
Okay.
And 2012, when they went with RG3 and when they won the division, and that was very exciting. And then Snyder empowered the quarterback RG3 to basically destroy the Shanahan regime from the inside. And it hasn't been a serious organization since then.
I would say it stopped being a serious organization when Mike Nolan told me the story about showing up for work after being there all night and having melted vanilla ice cream all over his desk because the owner thought that his defense was too vanilla.
Right, but their last chance was the Shanahan era. That was their last chance. They convinced a two-time Super Bowl winning coach to come, to coach the team, but even that wasn't enough to stop the dysfunction. I call it the aura of self-destruction. It's a team that has the ability to self-destruct. Like, those stories about factories where they have signs up that, like a blackboard that will say 0 days without an accident, 1 day without an accident. Well, the Nationals never get. I mean, the Commanders never get past 0. I mean, they are such a self-destructive organization. And even in the past 2 years, I mean, from retiring numbers to the Sean Taylor tribute that they botched, so many things.
Just the fact that he's not supposed to be around. He was banned, and he's standing there in front of all these W's, and and the legal part of it, that when information is on it, I mean, just the fact that the league spent a couple $1 million to get a verbal report. It's insane.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of cover up that it's wound up in Congress.
Oh,
but
yeah.
what's going to be the upshot of this? Is he ever really going to agree to sell? I even thought that statement of he's considering offers, like, or whatever that thing was in November, December. I'm like, oh my God, he's never, ever, ever. I'm thinking, if you met that guy, I met that guy. Like, he's never going to walk away. And without burning down all their houses or trying to.
He's selling the team. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it's sold by the next owners meeting in March.
Really?
Yeah. He's selling the team. That's going to happen. He just reached a settlement with the Maryland Attorney General about withholding money from customers in a lawsuit filed by the Maryland Attorney General. They had to pay it. They didn't agree to any guilt, but they paid a $250,000 fine. Now, for some people, that's the cost of doing business. But remember, this is a franchise that a couple of weeks before was bouncing 50-50 checks to their customers. So if they got to sign a $250,000 check, that's serious stuff. The DC Attorney General has the same lawsuit filed against the Dan Snyder and the Commanders. The Virginia Attorney General is conducting the same investigation that Maryland has done, that DC has done, and the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, a federal prosecutor, is looking into criminal charges of fraud involving Dan Snyder and the Commanders. That's all. That's not going to go away, even with the sale of the team. These are outside investigations. Now, the NFL supposedly is conducting their own investigation into the allegations by a former employee named Tiffany Johnston that she was sexually harassed and sexual misconduct against Dan Snyder. And they've hired Mary Jo White to investigate that internally. Now, Dan Snyder sells the team. I'm betting that investigation goes away. But these other investigations, they're out there. So no, he can't continue as an owner, because I think he's in trouble. trouble. Now the story is that he's looking to make England his team his new home. I don't know if that's far enough for him because I think England has an extradition treaty.
Well, we can only hope. Thom Loverro's here from the Washington Times. I want to ask you this because I haven't talked to you about Lamar at all. We've talked about other things and watching this from afar. And obviously, the stench from the football team down in Largo is, we could sit here all day. You guys do down at the team and in D.C. and the radio you do on a daily basis and podcast. You've been subjected to it. Up here, it's been Lamar, right? It's amazing how you cross 32 and everything sort of changes from the fan bases, right? It's kind of like crossing into Czechoslovakia or something. It's like a whole different thing going on up here. But the Lamar thing from afar, and RG3's role in it, right? As a consigliere to Lamar and knowing Lamar and Lamar shouldn't play and all of the ears of Lamar should look out for Lamar. Lamar should have had a Lloyd's of London. Lamar should have an agent, right? I mean, right at base, not having an agent over the last 6 or 7 weeks, I don't know that he has been smart enough to figure out what it's cost him in the way of public relations, that if his knee really was worse, that he would have had a mechanism to say, I'm not playing, my knee's no good. But this has been a real fiasco for the Ravens, and I have no doubt they're going to deal him, and all of the conjecture is true in regard that he's played his last snap, because I think they're done with him, because I think he's done with them, and reading all the tea leaves as a media. But you're a little outside. You're not attending these press conferences. You're not around, but you're always around. What do you make of all of this from the outside?
Well, you brought up the fact that he has no agent. Now, I was talking to my podcast partner, Kevin Sheehan, pointing out that we haven't heard much for weeks about what was going on with Lamar. And I pointed out because he doesn't have an agent. There's nobody out there to leak information. Now now in this case, that's worked against him. Like you said, there's been nobody out there to make his case. I find it hilarious that RG3 has now become the guy to make his case. Look, my experience with RG3 is different from the rest of the world. He was a fraud and a phony down here in Washington. He basically, I tell you what, here's what you need to know about RG3. He used the owner's yacht, Dan Snyder's yacht, for his honeymoon. Okay, that's what you need to know about. That's how the tight was between the owner and the player used it and abused it and hung it over his coaches and hung it over his teammates and was just a terrible teammate and is such a manipulative liar, So I find it interesting. Look, he was a backup in Baltimore, He was
canonized down in D.C. for the last 5 minutes. I mean, sort of the last flicker of the Snyder hope was he was the hope, right? And Snyder sort of knew that too, but I mean, the jock sniffing him. Hey, look, Bisciotti used to sit courtside with Ray Lewis and with Ed Reed, right, back in the day. Yeah. Bisciotti hadn't been sitting courtside with Lamar Jackson lately. We've noticed that up here too.
No, but so, I mean, I think you're right. Lamar is going to get traded, and I think he's done himself a disservice with his lack of representation, and he hasn't gotten any help from the organization in that sense. Because I don't think the Ravens are very good. Look, the Ravens, my impression is, obviously you know them a lot more, they seem to be a very tight-lipped organization, very close to the vest. Well, that doesn't always work for you. Sometimes you got to get your message out or a message out, and they don't seem to be very good at that.
Well, I mean, Chad Steele, that's his job, and his first order of business was to throw me out. So, like getting real information in the modern world of the internet and stuff, that was your job and my job because we're professionals at it. It's why I'm still here 31 years later. It's because I don't lie to people. I've never had to lie to people. But there's a point now with where we are, and this brings us full circle back to the John Angelos conversation, Thom, that whatever they say there, we now think it's God. But Harbaugh said, well, Harbaugh's lying. Harbaugh lies regularly. John Angelos says, till the Rockets red glare, sign a lease, bro. Sign a lease, and then we will stop asking the question. But until then, the simple asking of questions in these forum forces them to feel like they need to lie or make something up or half truth. I mean, this is 2 years in a row. The head coach has stood in front of the media in November and December and said, this is not a season ending injury for my quarterback. And both years it has been.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, it's a lack of understanding. There's a lot of organizations that are guilty of this. They don't understand what's happened in the sports media world in the past 5 years. When I would write something that fans wouldn't agree about, they say, well, this is a media controversy. And I say, well, if it's a media controversy, then it's a controversy because your decision making, it consumes everything, including the media right now. And people on the baseball side of baseball teams, the football side of football teams, they don't like it, but they need to understand the implications of their decision, how they play out in the media, and how it affects the organization. I mean, you think John Harbaugh cares about any of that? He doesn't care about any of that, but he should, because it affects his football team. I mean, the message that's out there that people are covering, that people are writing about on social media, that people are covering on TV and radio, that impacts the product on the field. And if you deny that, you're living in the Stone Age. And the smart teams embrace that. There's not many that will, but they all will at some point. And
Well, the Ravens came here as a community effort. The Ravens came here with PSLs, poor suckers licenses. I bought them, right? Like people bought in on this organization. And I had a great conversation down in Jacksonville a couple of weeks ago about that franchise with Sam Cavaris, who I know you know well as a Hall of Fame voter. And Sam's a Baltimorean, as well from Woodlawn. And he said the Jacksonville Jaguars operate as though they're a worldwide brand that just happens to have a branch office in Jacksonville. And then, of course, they play games in London, like all of that.
Right.
I feel like the Ravens have really seen what it's become. And the Wembley knee was a part of it. The deterioration of the city and the brand around the city and that thought has been a part of it. But, Thom, most Ravens games, tickets are $5 and $10 at game time to get in. Most Ravens games are that. And they've been that since the Wembley knee. And they've had this transcendent MVP quarterback, this exciting brand of football. And people have not – they try to sell me tickets. They try to sell me the PSLs that I turn back in on my app to buy playoff tickets and stuff. And the spirit in Baltimore, and you spent so much of your life in Baltimore, purple flamingos on lawn, purple basements, purple storytelling, purple Friday, all of that. They're our team. They're Baltimore. They represent that I don't know. I think they're a forum to bet, wear purple, get drunk on Sundays, like your team, play fantasy, like all of that. But nobody thinks of them as this foundational community spirit anymore. That like you need to have an ornament on your Christmas tree or make your house purple floodlights like the way it once was. And I don't want to be a geezer, but I was here when this thing sizzled in the same way as a Washington football person. You know what prosperity, when it really gets into the soul of a community, when you see it and feel it. We had it here. We really had it. Boy, somebody not named Chad Steele and Sashi Brown better be a part of bringing that back, because having a billionaire owner, not wearing socks on a boat down in the Bahamas, that's great as long as somebody like Kevin Byrne and David Modell are here and Larry Lucchino in your era and selling it, and making people feel a part of it. They've lost their way in that way. They really have. And to see John Angelos treat everyone, the fan base, in the way he did earlier this week, and Bisciotti running, and the Lamar Jackson thing here, and the organization sort of, you lied, no, you lied, no, you lied, no, you and they're trying to keep Lamar's value up, right? These next 6 or 7 weeks, they don't want any stories of Lamar skipping a hot tub treatment, right? Like right now, they're trying to put his value to say, good kid, did everything we needed. It just didn't work. I mean, God, he got injured, and if you need him, he's a great quarterback. But that's what they need to do as an organization the next 8 weeks, when it's very obvious that this is very estranged, and there will be a story coming out of this once he's in a Jets uniform or wherever he's going to be.
You're right about the failure to sell. Selling these franchises and their product is more important than ever, particularly to a generation coming up that doesn't consume sports the same way that we did. You have, you have a generation that doesn't like to sit and watch a whole game. They like to watch highlights. You have a generation that decides the day of the game. Oh, let's go to a football game. They're not buying season tickets. So because of that, you've got to sell the organization. You got to get out there and sell the product. Even if you think, well, we've been here for 20 years. We don't have to do that. So, that's what I think. I think they got to sell the product.
Well, covering up the bad things. They had a kid drop dead in a bad way the 2 days after mandatory camp broke. I mean, it was a tragic situation, yeah. But as an organization, they don't want me talking about Jalen Ferguson ever again. Right? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, and in the old days when this happened with, Big Daddy Lipscomb, like back in the day, it's a different story, right? Yeah. And in the modern era, their job is to intimidate people like us, threaten us with C&Ds and lawsuits and all of that. And transparency is just something they talk about being, not something that they ever have any intention of being. And to your point, they think selling the brand is hiding the bad things instead of just addressing them. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and as a journalist, I'm offended that they think I'm going to shine up their turd, but they have a whole department that does that at ravens.com or team.com or stateu.com. And they have media under Thom, and they have bought off media at BAL that they cannot criticize the organization at all. In any way. They can't go on the radio and say, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Eric DeCosta's an idiot for dealing. They couldn't say that on the radio at BAL. Even if they thought it, they have to take the team's side because they're in business with the team. So when you start buying off media organizations or taking New York Times reporters and putting them on your website and knowing they're under intimidation by your coach, then I don't think you're really doing anybody who's read our work or who really wants journalism and wants facts. You're not getting those people anymore. You're getting sycophants. And we've gotten into this debate, Thom, and this is interesting from our perspective in Baltimore. Are you a Lamar fan or are you a Ravens fan? Because this is a time you have to ask that. There's a lot of people that are Lamar fans. They want to see Lamar do well. Well, I don't want to see a broke football team with a $50 million quarterback and no wide receivers and a broken down quarterback that can't play in January, which has been a little preview for Steve. I mean, this is a moment of truth for Steve or for Stephen Ross or for the Glazer family to say, we're going to give Lamar $212 million of guaranteed money because you know as well as I do, somebody's going to do it, Thom. You know that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, somebody's going to be desperate enough to do it. It's funny. They don't have any wide receivers because they're not very good at picking wide receivers.
Well, in this offense, they'll never get a wide receiver to sign with them.
Right. But look at the players coming out of college have to sign with them, and they haven't been very good at drafting those players either when it comes to wide receiver. Look, I want to ask you something else that has something to do with the Orioles because I'm real curious about this. The Orioles hired a director, a person in charge of content, the director of content, a guy named Cal Perry.
Never heard of him.
Well, you should look this up. You should go back. There's some kind of story here. I don't know what it is. Cal Perry worked for CNN and MSNBC for like 20 years. Cal Perry is his credentials as a real-time journalist are very impressive. And the Orioles hired him about a month ago as director of content. It's such a shocking hire, out of the ordinary. I don't even know what it means. I don't know what he's doing, directing their content, trying to deal with the John Angelos press conference. But I was just curious if you had heard about him.
I had not. I've looked him up. Al Jazeera, CNN, Voice of America, MSNBC, NBC News. I'm very familiar with Michelle Andres, right? I mean, she was sort of first in the boat. She's never left. She's got a lot of power. I mean, she's the voice of their brand online, and their brand online is this saccharine. These team brands online are um, they're the antithesis of what we've tried to do, which is present fact, and they stand up against that and then throw people like me out and say, you'll have no facts over there, you'll have no access, and they shut their access down. So the Ravens have been really the Ravens are really good at doing social media content. All teams look at the Ravens as a little bit of a guiding light. So the Orioles have been getting their ass kicked for a long time. But to your point, on purpose, because there can be no criticism of a 53 and 108 team.
Right. Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yes.
how are you going to be a columnist for that? Thom, last before I let you go, I got to ask you this because it's my first note, and I've kept you way longer. You're always good to me, and I miss you. I miss you in press boxes. I miss breaking up with you and having fun and eating hot dogs and doing all the stuff we do. I'm writing a thing now, and you and many people, and you're one of the few people I really read regularly because you show up on my Facebook. I read your brief. I aspire to do what you do as well as you do it. I've been a writer since
Well,
as
thank
a
you.
kid, right? And I'm a really good marketer and I'm an entrepreneur, but I've said this a lot. Like I could wear my Drug City shirt and tell you should come to Dundalk with us on March 3rd, but I never realized the first three letters of my name were a suffix for all sorts of great things, like awesomeness, right? Like
Yes.
wistfulness, right? If I would have known this, I would have hijacked Preakness back in the 80s. I mean, I would have, right? I mean, I would have. But I thought of writing a column. I started talking to the Baltimore Banner people. I was inspired by what they're doing. And Ted Venetoulis was a friend of mine. And I just got caught up into, and some friends of mine said, you should write a column. You should write a sports column. And you should be the guy that Banner hires. And I'm like, well, thank you very much, but I got a gig and it's good. And, they're nice people. I like MTS and Kimmy. I think they're doing a great job. Subscriber, the whole deal. But I said, what am I going to call my, and I thought, well, Rock Around the Clock was already taken. You know what I mean? And I started to think about what I call it. And I thought columnist. So I'm calling my columnist. So I've asked every columnist. I asked Mike Lupica last week, what makes a great columnist? I mean, I think you're really you're a guy I read and you're always to the point, but I guess I could critique you and say what makes you great or what makes you, first off, it's wisdom. It's knowing a lot and having facts straight. It's shooting straight. But what is important? What advice would you give me of writing a great column?
Well, for you, I think you've got the talent that you need to, and understanding that you need to do this. And that's to make comfortable people uncomfortable. To make, like Joe Mencken said, to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I'm real good at that second part, afflicting the comfortable. And I think that's a big part of the job, is holding people's feet to the fire. It's also storytelling as well. But ultimately, you've got to be the guy to stick your finger in the eye of the powers that be and say, no, you're not going to get away with this. You got to, that's the job to me.
God, thank you. Drop the mic. Thom Loverro from the Washington Times giving the kid in me. Wait, I was 16 or 17 when you met me, right? I mean, I don't know that we knew each other at the Sun, but we probably walked the picket line together in 87, right?
Well, actually, I was management then. I was an editor of one of the zoned editions.
Okay,
So,
all right.
so I had to work, and I worked out in Howard County. I didn't have to deal with the picket line, thank goodness.
Let me
But
work on some of
I
my
remember when you
my
worked.
slogans. Share the wealth. Share the wealth. Was that good?
I remember when you were on the Evening Sun side. I remember that. Yeah, I was
the
on the
precocious
Morning Sun.
whippersnapper.
I was with the Morning Sun as a reporter for the last 3 years I was there. So I remember you being on the Evening Sun. I remember you, Nestor. Absolutely.
Well, the rockumentary for Hammerjacks is coming out on the 4th in East Point, in my neighborhood I grew up in. I could literally walk from my parents' house, and I'm a part of the documentary. So all of the lost 80s rock and roll exploits of what happened after midnight at Hammerjacks coming as my Baltimore Sun. I still have my pop music critic. It said right there on my business card, Evening Sun. Thom Loverro, the Washington Times, giving me great advice, being a great guest as always, and thanks for being a wealth of information on this John Angelos thing and for providing a perspective, even though I rambled in the beginning because I want to do that. But you're one of the very few people that brings some wisdom to this as to what this is. And I mean, I do appreciate you stopping me and saying they're not moving the team. I think that's an important message.
Well, thank you, Nestor. I always enjoy being on.
Thom Loverro stayed. Bonus. Now I can't call Thom to like 2025 and have him on. I am Nestor. We are WNST AM 1570 Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore positive. And I didn't even get to the Caps.